Hey, Rebel Bankers, welcome back to the Real Estate Money School. I'm your host, Chris Noggle, and I've got an extra special guest today. I've got Matthew Sullivan. So we spent a little bit of time before the podcast got kicked off, just about talking, about markets and stockbroker stuff and all this fun stuff that we're going to get into in just a moment. But Matthew is very unique. He's got a heck of a story and one heck of a resume, I guess would be the best way. So he's the CEO of Quantum Real Estate. He's just clearly a serial entrepreneur, co-founded two real estate funds, a Reg A Plus and a Reg D, which I'm sure we'll cross that bridge. Not only that, did extensive work with Richard Branson with the Virgin Corp. If you don't know who Richard Branson is, then this might not be the right podcast for you anyway. It was in finance in London, UK, Virgin London Air Ambulance. We didn't talk about that, but I'm sure we will. Ex-stockbroker like myself, and he did it back in the 80s, was working over in Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, which Singapore is now one of the hubs in the financial world. And he's also an author, as if he, hasn't done enough. He authored a book, Head First, and also has a podcast called Hooked on Startups. So welcome to the show.
Chris, I was just thinking, that's not me, surely. Anyway, Chris, it's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to dive into that. But let's talk to the audience for a second. So every one of you watching this, you're all on your journey to becoming a rebel banker. And that journey starts with experience. It starts with knowledge, listening to podcasts, reading books, YouTube, all sorts of ways you can get knowledge today. But the one thing in life that we fail so many times at is applying knowledge, is actually taking what we learn and actually going out and doing something with it. You see, knowledge is not power. It's the application of knowledge that actually gives you the power and gets you where you're going to go. So I'm going to give all of you a challenge. If you've heard this podcast before, you've heard this challenge, and maybe you've already taken action on it. But if you haven't, I got to ask you, why? Here's the challenge. I'm going to give you something for free. And I'm going to give you something for free, but it takes you to put some effort in to get that. And here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you a copy of either one of my books, whatever one you want. The Private Money Guide, okay, showing you where all the money is for all your real estate deals, or Mapping Out the Millionaire Mystery, The Secrets of the Wealthy. You can have both of these books for free. But what you got to do is you got to go to my website, chrisnoggle.com, and you got to go to the resources tab, grab your mouse, and 2 clicks on it until you see free book. And then you got to click that book, and you can either get the ebook for free, or you can pay for shipping and you can have that book. If you read these books, that will be one thing. But if you actually do one thing in that book, if you just change one thing in your life, it will be amazing what will happen into the future. So that's your challenge. Let's see how many of you actually take action and grab the book, but not just grab it, take action on it. So with that being said, Matthew, let's dive right in. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you're doing today, and then let's take a trip back in history and time and talk about where you were, because you got an extensive background.
Well, thank you, Chris. And I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Quantum RE. And what we do is we help homeowners unlock some of the equity in their home without taking on more debt. So what we have is a home equity agreement, which is not a loan, it's not a remortgage, it's not a reverse mortgage. And what it does is it helps homeowners tap into the equity that's locked up in their home, and they don't have to borrow money, they don't have to make monthly payments, and it doesn't appear as added debt. So that's what we are focused on now. We've been building the company for the last 2.5 years, and we are pretty busy at the moment. And I think this is an alternative financing option for homeowners that is long overdue. And we are helping homeowners unlock millions of dollars. So that's what we're working on right now. We're very excited about the potential for that.
So could we go one layer deeper into that? Because I think a lot of people heard that and got really excited about that. So, we all know what a home equity line of credit is. So what you're doing is you're allowing to unlock that, but you said a couple key things. You said without extra payments. So can we just go one layer deeper in that so we can understand what it is you do?
Yes, of course. So if we take a typical home, so the home, over time, the homeowner will pay down the mortgage. And as you pay down the mortgage, what you're doing is you're building up ownership in the home itself, because no longer does the bank owe, you don't owe the bank 90% of the value of your home. You may pay your mortgage off. So the bank owns, say, half of your home and the equity represents the other half. But the biggest issue with owning equity in your home is that you can't unlock it unless you go back to the bank and borrow money secured against the equity that you have. So it's a very antiquated process, which is really just something that is a legacy of how home ownership has been delivered in the US and throughout most of the rest of the world. So what we have is a program where we have a number of investors who are interested in participating in the potential increase in value of your home rather than being paid interest. So the agreement we have with them, it's not a loan. So they're not lending you money. They're investing in the equity in your home. And the way they get paid back is if your home goes up in value, when you sell your home, a percentage of that increase in value goes to them. So they get back their original investment plus a share of the increase in value. So that way they're partners in the ownership of your home rather than just being lenders secured against your property. And the real benefit of this type of structure, which is equity-based financing rather than debt-based financing, is there are no monthly payments. And there aren't monthly payments because there's no interest. And you pay the investors back out of the sales proceeds. So depending on the contracts, you've got up to 30 years to sell your home or to refinance the agreement. So they're long-term agreements backed by investments from companies that want to make long-term investments in properties that are not for sale. And in the meantime, you're a great partner for them because you will continue to pay the mortgage, you'll continue to pay the property taxes, you'll look after the asset for them. And then when you come to sell, you share in the potential appreciation.
That is the sound of the light bulb going off in my head.
Right.
Normally
it's the moment where people say, sorry, what was the middle bit?
Why hasn't someone thought of it? That is genius. And it's genius on so many different levels that I don't even know where to start with that, because that's not all we're going to talk about in this podcast. But like, do you realize how many opportunities that would open for people? You see, in my book, in both of my books, this one, The Private Money Guide, in this one, I think it's chapter 2 is hidden equity. Yeah. Hidden equity right there. What is hidden equity? It's the equity in your home. Yet the only way I've ever known to talk to people about how to tap into the equity in their home so that their house can become an asset versus a liability and actually make them money using the equity to go make, passive income, was to have a monthly payment back to a bank and then be in, not in full control of your money. So you provide an opportunity for people to tap the equity in their house without a monthly payment by sharing in the upside appreciation of the house. Is there any caveats if the house value goes down like 08? Like, is there any clawback or anything, or not really?
No, it's very different to a loan, because a loan is very separate as an instrument to the underlying security. So the home in a loan represents security for the debt. The debt is the instrument. In our situation, to answer your question, the amount that you will owe the investor is directly proportionate to the value of the home when you sell it. So that means if your house goes up in value, we make more. If it goes down in value, we do take the risk of potentially losing money on the transaction.
Will you help just about anybody that has equity in their house? Is there criteria?
Yes.
I don't mean to keep talking about it, but this is just ridiculous. Yes. And my mind is a completely different place of thinking how this will work.
Well, first of all, let me just stress that this is not something that we invented. So it's been around for about a decade. And that's really good news because it's gone through all of the learning pains of these types of new financial tools, as it were. So it started off with a company called Equity Key in San Diego about 10 years ago. There are now, including ourselves, 5 companies that are providing home equity agreements. And last year, we estimate that around $750 million was invested in residential homes. It would have been probably twice that this year had we not suffered the effects of the pandemic. But the really good news is that the growing pains that these initial programs have we've gone through that now, and so a lot of the issues and the sort of roadblocks that we would have come across, we've managed to overcome. So to answer your question, there are caveats, but they're not unreasonable. And the caveats are things like, you must look after the home. You must maintain it. You must pay your mortgage, property taxes.
Aren't those
There
things
are,
that just happen anyway that should happen with everybody that owns a house?
well, that's right. But again, you do tend to, and there are things like you can't borrow more money because that would erode our equity position. And it's really just common sense stuff. And there are limits. So the amount that we will invest in your home is capped at 20% of the current value, or $350,000. And there are other limits. For example, if you add your existing mortgage to the amount that we invest, that's got to be 70% or less. And that's good, because that means that you will still own 30% equity in your home. So we don't want to go anywhere near this feeling that you've over leveraged your home or you're no longer the owner. Another couple of other points: we don't take an interest in the property. In other words, we don't appear on title. We're not going to turn up and expect to camp out in your spare bedroom. We're there with a lien on the title to protect our agreement, but we're not owners. So you maintain ownership of the property, and all we do is we share in the upside. So that's how we get paid.
That is just phenomenal. I was thinking that, I'm like, this can't be the first person that came up with this, but it's kind of like a lot of the things I do in my book, Mapping Out the Millionaire Mystery. These are things that have been around for hundreds of years, yet people never hear about them. This is just yet another one of those mysteries or secrets out there of ways you can do this. And for somebody, I always talk about people that have houses that pay them off, and that, they get really excited. They throw a party, a house payoff party. And every time when I go to one of these, I go there and I ask the person, I said, so what's changed in your life? And the answer is always, well, I don't have a mortgage payment anymore. Yeah, but are you taking more vacations? Are you able to buy a bigger, a nicer car? Can you, do you have all this extra money? Well, no, I just don't have a mortgage payment. That money in equity is literally lazy sitting. It's money sitting on their couch, eating their potato chips, drinking their soda while watching their TV, while that person's still out there working. With what you do, you provide an opportunity for them to use that equity, go out there and turn that equity that you get, that money you give them, which is the share in the equity. They can take that money and go out and make whatever, 5, 10, 20. I mean, who knows, any amount of money on that money. And then that's an income for them, but yet they don't have a monthly payment eroding that income stream.
It is. And the biggest challenge, as you said at the very beginning, is education. What many people don't understand is that if you pay off your mortgage, then you're actually, the value of your home in terms of how it appreciates is actually going down, because you lose that leverage element. And so trying to explain that is, you feel like one's going down a bit of a rabbit hole where you've got the twin imposters, debt on one side, you've got good debt and bad debt. And everybody assumes that all debt is bad, but debt can be useful to provide leverage to give you a better return. But the underlying, what is present everywhere is fear of debt. And it is this fear of the banks being able to take away what is your home. And that is, I think, more prevalent today. And funny enough, there was some research, I think it was HUD, that did some research relatively recently about why qualifying seniors don't take out reverse mortgages when it could be a perfectly acceptable option for them. And it is really because of this fear of debt. So what we do is say, what we're doing is not debt. It's not something that is debt that we pretend isn't debt. It's something that's very different. In a commercial real estate transaction, you have junior debt, senior debt, mezzanine, equity, and you have a number of other elements of funding in what we lovingly call the capital stack. But in a home, it's just debt. So what we're doing is we're bringing something that was tried and tested in the commercial world, and we're just applying it to the residential marketplace. And there's $17.8 trillion of equity in single family homes in the US. And there are 14.7 million people who have homes where they own 50% or more of the equity. So there's all of that equity. And my final point is, it is a large, concentrated, non-financial, non-cash flowing asset. So
absolutely, you nailed it.
And so what we're doing is we're helping you sell some of your asset and move money from your equity account into your bank account. That's all That's all it is.
And then if they're smart enough, they'll take that money in their equity account and turn that into a passive income stream that will continue to pay them. So listen, like the one thing I can tell you and everybody else watching this is I feel like I just found a piece of candy that is really, really good that I'm going to use a lot, because now I've got another quiver in my
Yes.
back pocket that now I'm going to go out and I'm going to use. And I'm going to certainly be talking to you a lot about different people that this can help with the different things I do. So folks, that was phenomenal. I didn't mean to go so deep into that, but I know that they will get value out of this, because most people don't even realize something like this even exists. They just think the only way to use their equity is to go through the traditional channels of the banks, and the banks do the same thing they always do. They move money and print money and take your money. And that's what we do. So I love this. So let's move on past that, because there's so much more to talk about. Let's go back to kind of your early years, when you were, a stockbroker, and then let's kind of move through, your past a little bit up to the Richard Branson, and just talk a little bit about things you learned, the ways that, maybe they correlate to what's happening in today's, economic environment, because this is a very pivotal time for every one of us.
It is. And I think, see, a lot of it is a function of just time served. So I'm not sure how to sort of unpack all of this, but after a while, you get faint signals from the future when you see things. So even though people say some things are unprecedented, I mean, they are in some respects, but you think, well, actually, this is a pattern that I've seen before in something else. So I think really what I've been very lucky to have done is I've been to a lot of places. I've worked with a number of really smart people, far, far smarter than I am. And when you're in that environment, you don't necessarily see how good it is, but sometimes, and in most cases, it's a few years later when you look back and you say, gosh, that really was such a fascinating time. And that's normally, as I was saying earlier to you, that's normally matched with this feeling of just utter stupidity that, why didn't I just take this opportunity? So, one can distill these things down into sayings such as, normally when someone asks you something, your immediate reaction should be yes. And then try and figure out, how to get out of it afterwards, rather than try and ponder all the potential outcomes there and then before you make the decision. But no, I started off, I went to Westminster School in London. I left university, read law at university, sold life insurance for 3 years for one of the university-based insurance companies. And again, it's just something that I sort of fell into, but then moved back to just outside London from Birmingham, and got a job with a company called First Pacific Securities, which was a small stockbroker based in Hong Kong, based in Exchange Square 2 in central Hong Kong. And we were a team of half a dozen or so. And I got the job because my father, who ran a bank in London, knew the chap that ran the company in London and said, would you give my annoying 23-year-old son a job? So I started off, being in charge of photocopying and the telex machine, which I managed not to completely, cock that up. So over time, I just got more and more exposed to, because no one knew. When someone says you're a stockbroker, you go, wow, but no one really knows what a stockbroker is.
I've noticed that nobody knows what it is at all.
You think that you have these images of people on the trading floor with brightly colored jackets sort of shouting at each other. And we did have that. So just down the road from London where I worked was the London International Financial Futures Exchange, or LIFI. And those were the guys that had these sort of, blue and pink squares on their sort of brightly colored jackets. Those were the days. But no, I was a salesman. I was involved in Far East securities. So we were building a company that was broking Far East securities. So those were equity shares in companies based in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. And we developed expertise. We had a research function. We had seats on the Philippines, the Thai, the Malaysian exchanges, the Hong Kong exchange as well. And we would broke the markets to institutional investors in London. And for me, that meant that, 2 or 3 times a year, I would go on these fantastic long trips all the way around the region, where most of the time my eyes were like pickled onions because of, what I was seeing in terms of how different it was. But those were the heydays, and the markets flew, and we all did very well. And then, sort of one thing led to another. We ended up leaving, myself and my boss, Rory McCarthy. We ended up leaving the stockbroking firm and setting up our own company. Well, he set the company up. I was there as this, again, wide-eyed sort of 25-year-old or whatever, 27-year-old. He set up a company that he basically wanted to go out on his own. So that's how we ended up working with Richard Branson. I mean, this could end up being like a 4-hour podcast, actually. So I just suddenly realized.
That's right. So the stock brokerage in this new company actually is how you got introduced to Richard?
Well, because, okay, so here's the funny bit.
Richard, I should say.
Well, he wasn't Sir then, but what happened was one of the companies, so we set up this company, we set up our own corporate finance company. One of the investments that we made was in Lindstrand Balloons. Now, Lindstrand Balloons is a company run by the eponymous Per Lindstrand, this very charismatic Swede, who was remarkably good at arm wrestling, I seem to remember. But he owned this hot air balloon company. He used to run Thunder and Colt, split up from Thunder and Colt, built a competing hot air balloon factory 3 doors down from their factory in a place called Oswestry in England. And Rory knew Per Lindstrand, so we funded him. And Per had this idea with Rory to build a balloon that could fly around the world. Now, Rory was going to be the pilot, but then one day, our office was just a stone's throw away from Richard Branson's in Kensington. Rory wrote to Richard and said, look, we're building this balloon to fly around the world. It's the last great adventure. We think you would be an excellent pilot. What about it? And so Richard wrote back and said, dear Rory, why not? So our relationship with Richard really came out of this idea that he should be the pilot flying around the world in a hot air balloon that we built. We then ended up with this sort of fantastic close relationship with him because of the friendship that he and Rory developed. And that led us into all sorts of, fabulous adventures, with Richard and the Virgin Group, because we were so closely allied to him as a friend, rather than, coming in as one of the business entities.
Wow. That is an awesome story. So then from there, like where did you go with Richard? So you guys had this friendship relationship, but you ended up going on and you were working with him. Were you partners with Richard?
Well, no. So what happened was, so we had a separate company called McCarthy Corporation. And we ended up really being, I suppose, the sort of de facto gatekeepers. So a number of the opportunities that were presented to Virgin, he would sort of Richard would pass them to us and say, well, what do you think? So we ended up putting together some fairly big projects, working sort of in parallel with him. We didn't work for him directly, but we were very, close partners at that point. And so we worked on projects such as Virgin Cosmetics, Virgin Clothing, Virgin, and a number of other sort of, Virgin projects that really were projects that he was, I suppose, approached to do, but just didn't have the bandwidth. And so we were there, trying to unpack these and find out whether or not they were something that he would get involved with. And we ended up, launching, a number of different companies. The link with Virgin Virgin Air Ambulance was the Express Newspapers Group were sponsoring the air ambulance, and then I think the Royal London Hospital, approached Richard and said, would you like to sponsor it, because their sponsorship is coming to an end. So I ended up working very closely with the hospital. So, I was a director and a trustee of that incredible charity. So I got to see some of the most fantastic experiences of working with a team of doctors as they would fly in and, save people and perform open heart surgery in public houses and, things like that. I think we're getting slightly off track here. Sorry,
That's
listeners.
okay.
Yes,
It's all interesting stuff. I mean, it's just, piecing it all together and kind of seeing this whole journey and then, like kind of seeing where it goes after that it's fascinating.
And I think, so the noise in the background is the printer running here, actually. Of course, one can't control any of these external influences. But really just that whole sort of exposure to the ability to do things. And what really came out of all of that is that there is no such word as can't or no. So I was working alongside Richard and his team while he was developing Virgin Mobile, while he was developing V2 Music that we, funnily enough, became very closely involved with, while he was developing, Virgin Aviation or Virgin Airlines. So we were in the epicenter of all of these things, these huge businesses. And I remember having conversations with the original CEO of Virgin Mobile that became a multi-billion-dollar company. Tom Alexander, a fantastic chap. I remember sitting around a table in Richard's house, just kicking around plans, how we were going to kick this off, and that was not too long after this chap turned up at our office. In fact, it was about a year after a guy turned up at our office with the plans for a prepaid mobile phone, which we summarily dismissed as never going to take off because this concept of 43% of the population having a mobile phone. Are you crazy? Never going like that. So there we were saying that his plans for mobile phone penetration were off the scale and completely crazy. And this idea of, who would want a prepaid phone? So now there you are. In public, I've now admitted that we were the people that turned down the first prepaid mobile phone, but and subsequently Virgin were smart enough to pick it up and run with it.
Yeah, that was a good one to pick up. Just saying. just calling it out as it is. It might not have been a bad one to pick up and run with. Oh my goodness. So where should we go from there? I mean, one thing I'd really like to cover, because this is the real estate money school, we're always talking about real estate and we're always talking about money, and the two really are intertwined because you can't have one without the other. But the money part of it is really just a tool. It's just a tool to get the things that you need to do in your life to live the perfect day that you're after. But you started these two funds. How long ago did the funds come about? Now, when we talk about funds, the average person, just thinks of a fund or a mutual fund as, like a Fidelity, a Vanguard, an Oppenheimer fund that they buy in their 401k. And it's just a hodgepodge of a bunch of different stocks put together in this fund and they just mix it around. That's kind of what people know. But the funds that we do, because I'm also a partner in several funds, and as you are, and you co-founded these funds, let's take a moment. I've never done this on the show, and just explain the private funds. And, there's the private sector and then there's the retail world, and there's really a big disconnect. So I think maybe let's talk about that for a moment, if you will.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, the basic sort of, theory behind a fund is it's a pool of capital. Mm-hmm. And you have a number of investors who individually would not be able to get exposure to a particular asset or asset class. But together, if they combine all of their capital and it's managed by someone who has access to deal flow, what you then have is the opportunity for those individual investors to pool their capital and to then get involved in projects that they otherwise would not have been able to get exposure to. So that's the primary benefit of these private funds. Now you have private funds which rely on an exemption of the Securities Act, and those are typically Regulation D funds. And those funds are private placements. They are designed to be pools of capital that typically operate with 100 or fewer investors. And so those are the most widely used vehicle in the US for raising capital, particularly into real estate. Most of the hedge funds that you see, most of the private capital funds that you see are all Regulation D. There's no limit to the amount of capital you can put into a Regulation D. There is a limit to the number of investors you can have before you then have to become a registered company, which means you have to appear on the stock market. But the great thing about the Regulation D and the Regulation S exemptions is that you can get started very quickly. The SEC does not need to qualify a Regulation D offering, although you do have to provide information to the SEC through a Form D, which advises them when people make investments. So the regulatory burden is very light. The cost of setting up a fund is relatively low, and it gives you the ability to leverage deal flow and experience that you have by tapping into a pool of money that's normally provided by accredited investors. There are other capital structures under Regulation D that enable non-accredited investors, but again, those are typically restricted to 35 non-accredited investors for each fund. So the big difference between these funds and the large funds that you see from Blackstone and Fidelity is really the fact that they're not listed. In other words, they're private funds, and also they're very limited in terms of the number of people that are involved. And because of that, they're far less liquid than the bigger funds, and they tend to be very specialized in particular real estate areas, like real estate lending or multifamily homes, or a geographic specification. So it's a very useful tool for small real estate developers who want to raise capital from third parties in a compliant way that's in line with securities regulations, but without a very large regulatory burden that they would face if they were going to the public markets.
Wow, that was a fantastic explanation. I could have never done it that well. And
I just made all of that up, by the way.
Yeah, so none of that was actually, real stuff. It was just,
it sounded good though, didn't it? Yes.
It sounded great. And this is a tool that we use in practice. We've done 5, total funds at this point. Most of them real estate based. One of them we lend to insurance companies, which honestly opened the door for something that I sometimes look at. Why are we doing real estate when we can just lend money to insurance companies? Just less risk. But it's a fantastic way to do exactly what you just said and raise that. So you have funds, and what is the primary purpose of your funds? And are they closed? Are they still available? What are some of the specifics about these funds?
Well, if they're both the real estate debt funds, the first fund we set up 5 years ago is now closed. It's relatively small. It's around 5 million. Mm-hmm. And that's a commercial real estate debt fund. So what we do is we lend money to real estate developers who primarily focus in the residential real estate sector. So they are residential real estate developers. So they will take land parcels, develop. We'll lend primarily in as first position, sometimes as second position lenders. And then we'll lend on a short-term basis, 18 to 24 months. Normally our loans will be refinanced as the developer builds the project and as there's more value that's actually built in. The Regulation A+ fund, which is like a Regulation D, mm-hmm. but it's between a private placement and a public company. This is something that came out of the Jobs Act. I can't remember if it's Title 3 or Title 4. I can never remember which one it is. But it enables you to raise up to $50 million a year from an unlimited number of accredited and non-accredited investors. So you don't have that same cap or restriction you have on Regulation D. That is a fund that is the same model, which is where we lend money to developers who develop residential properties on a commercial basis. In other words, we don't lend to owner-occupiers. And that fund, again, is growing steadily. The objective there really is to build a much longer-term play because we have the access to accredited and non-accredited. So at the moment, like all of these funds, we have been affected by COVID. We're sort of coming out of that, the capital restrictions and the liquidity restrictions that we suffered as a result of everyone sitting on their hands during the pandemic. But our plans really are to really grow that commercial business. Now, my involvement is very much on the sidelines. I have some very, very smart, experienced and clever partners who do all of the heavy lifting. I helped set the fund up 3 years ago. My absolutely primary focus today is on Quantum, which is the company that helps unlock the home equity.
which I think is one of the most fascinating things that we've talked about. So how do you get Quantum out there? Like, what is your ideal person that you like to work with for that?
Well, the great thing about our product is that there are so many people that can use it. So it's not a niche product. As I mentioned, there's nearly 15 million homeowners who have lots of equity that we could help. We can also help people that have poor credit scores, that have no income. We can provide equity-based financing through our home equity agreements. If you're in forbearance, for example, we've taken people out of forbearance. We've paid off their mortgage. We've paid off the fees and the amount of outstanding. We've given them their house back because our funding is not dependent on their ability to borrow money. So we've got a very large potential marketplace. And it's a bit like the Pacific Ocean, and there's only 4 or 5 trawlers on there at the moment. So there's an enormous amount of potential customers out there. And there's very few of us, but the number of transactions is growing significantly. So our marketing strategy is to go direct to market or direct to the homeowner. So we advertise through Facebook and we use social media, and we have some great responses to that because people see the advertisement, and we have a process that enables them to calculate the potential amount of equity that they could release from their home on our website. And we then follow up with a phone call. We also work through channel partners. So we work through companies that have customers that need funding. And those could be CPAs, for example, that have clients that have equity, realtors, mortgage providers and mortgage originators, because if someone wants to get a mortgage but can't, they may still qualify for a home equity agreement. So we have a number of people whose main business is to provide mortgages and reverse mortgages, but they're also a source of introductions for us. We also have other channel partners like solar companies, for example, where the homeowner wants the solar panels, but can't raise the capital, can't borrow the money, or just doesn't want to. So we're a great way of using the equity in your home to be able to buy something that immediately adds value to your home and helps with your cash flow. So we have lots of channel partners. We work with divorce attorneys as well, funnily enough, because in situations where the family doesn't want to have to sell the home just because there's a divorce, we're able to provide some capital that helps the parties come to an arrangement where the home doesn't have to be sold. So we have a number of these channel partnerships, and those numbers are growing significantly this year as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine that you are about to have a major growth spurt in that business with everything happening right now. I mean, you hold the key to unlock so many people's money problems, and it's just a matter of getting it out there. And I'll tell you something, I know a ton of people that I'm going to tell, about this. So, in the description, so everybody watching this, what we're going to do is we're going to put the link on where you could go to get more information about Quantum RE, and you can see what this potentially would look like for you. And then I think the next step is once you get that capital, you need to turn that capital into an income stream or find a way to make that money work even harder for you. Don't go blow it. Don't go putting the new deck on. I mean, I'm sure that would increase the value of your house, but the idea would be to make that money work for you so you actually can live a better life, have more passive income, and do it without the burden of that debt structure underneath you. I love it, Matthew. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I love your story. So how would they go about finding you? I mean, what is in the description? What do we want to put there? What's the best site?
It's quantumre.com, QUANTMRE.com. It's a bit of a strange name, but the idea behind it was, part of our plan is to fractionalize and trade or create a secondary market for these home equity agreements. So the idea was that you're taking a home equity agreement and you're chopping it up into little quanta or little particles. So our plan is to build an exchange so people can invest in these as well as participate, as the homeowner. Funnily enough, we're also raising capital on Republic, which is a wonderful crowdfunding platform. So we've got another month or so until the end of September. So if anybody wants to take a look at us as a potential investment in the company itself, then you can go to Republic and take a look there for Quantum. But to find out from a homeowner's perspective how we can help you, just go to quantumre.com.
Great. So what we're going to do, folks, for everybody listening to this, we're going to, number one, right now we're August 26th. So we're going to expedite this to get it up on there. So if any of you want to take part of the crowdfunding, you'll have that opportunity, as well as the opportunity to just go to Quantum RE and see what that looks like for you. And then happy to, speak with any of you as always on how this works. And I'll also have Matthew come back on Money School TV's platform and do a little presentation there so that everybody can understand about this. The more awareness, the more education that you all have with this, the more you are equipped to go out there and actually start changing your financial future. So Matthew, thank you for that.
Chris, no, it's the pleasure is mine, I assure you. Thank you.
Awesome. So folks, that's about a wrap for this. There's been incredible golden nuggets dropped here. I know we spoke a lot about quantum, but honestly, that is just one thing that everybody needs to know about, because it's just another thing you can use that will really put you in a much better place. And we live with enough debt. So it's time to start living out of debt and finding ways to use the equity that you have right now. And that is an absolute way to do that. So for all of you, remember the challenge I gave you early on? I gave you a challenge, and that challenge was to grab a copy of a free book. So here's the books again: The Private Money Guide, all about that hidden equity. You want to know what to do with that hidden equity that Quantum RE is going to do? It's right here. And then also this one's going to show you how to move that money just like the banks do and make that money work twice as hard for you without you having to work any harder. So those are the challenges. Grab a copy of the book, read it, and apply that knowledge, and get on Quantum RE's website and check that out, because that is something fascinating. So Matthew, thank you so much. And like I said, I'm going to reach out to you offline about getting you on MSTV and having you tell that audience all about quantum.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
You're welcome. So folks, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Real Estate Money School. We'll see you on the next episode.